What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters Live. I'm David Wilson, and we are back with another Friday live stream. And for some reason, my streaming setup is totally choking at the moment. Something is killing. Let me see. So I'll tell you why it's choking, but just give me 1 second. I'm going to reach really far over to another computer. Okay, so OBS is not happy. Let me just kill Discord. And possibly Firefox. Okay, that may help, they may not help, but anyway, so we're finally set up in the new official System Crafters studio, otherwise known as my office in my new house. We finally got moved in, everything's all set up, and it's, let me see, is the stream going okay? Okay, yeah, so I've got my computer setup all set up, got internet, electricity, everything. The only thing I don't have, which you can probably tell by the shine on my face, is air conditioning, and it's extremely hot in Greece right now, so you may get to see me sweating the whole time in this stream, but nonetheless, I'm very happy to finally be in a stable living condition and a stable condition for making videos and streams, because it means I'll be able to get back to everything as usual as before. It's been a very weird year, and I've had a lot of gaps in video production, a lot of gaps in streams, and I want to thank all of you for sticking around with me in that amount of time. And now we're finally at a point where all that can become more of a regular schedule again, and we can start building on some of the ideas that we've been talking about over the last year or so. So I'm very happy to be back and be in a decent situation that we can build from. Let me know if we're having issues with the stream. Like on my side, I'm watching like the live feed of the stream and it's frozen. So let me know if it's frozen for anybody else. Seems to be okay though. Ashra says the temporary green screen patch is gone. It was a cornerstone of these streams. Yes, thank God that is gone. I have a huge green screen, like the one that I originally used in a lot of my videos and streams, and it's behind me. It's way behind me, so I can go way back and not actually hit the green screen or have it flapping around behind my head the whole time. So that's fantastic. I'm very happy about that. So hello to Alex Milner, Minas Mezar, Amalvedia, Joseph Ferrano, Alejandro, Haider Mirza, Piotr, Peter, Mark Benoit, Ashraz, who else here? Mr. Bill. Yes, it's very nice to be set up and to be able to stream and record videos normally again. Man, it's just been a ridiculous period of time. There hasn't, probably since April, there hasn't been a period where like I've had a stable living condition, because I've been going back and forth between various different places. So it's been quite a ride. Hello to Jeff as well. Alejandro says, a cornerstone, yes. Yes, I'm a happy nerd because I get to sit at my computer in my actual desk with an actual monitor and not just my laptop the whole time. So I think that's kind of nice. Hello to Derek and Asita. I guess is probably how you pronounce your name. All right. So the complication of today's stream is that I've actually gone and set up a 2-computer streaming configuration again, mainly because I wanted to try it out because I have a better setup for that, but it seems to not be working very well at the moment. It's a little bit choppy, at least what I see on the screen. Something is eating all of my CPU, so I'll have to do a little bit of tweaks as the weeks go on and try to perfect the setup. And wow, what is going on with the streaming up? Okay. Anyway, that'll take some messing with, but hopefully it won't cause too much trouble for the stream today. Let me know at any time if you end up with any trouble, like with the stream buffering, or if it just drops out entirely. Okay, so let me get into today's updates. So like I said, I'll be able to get back into regular content production for System Crafters again. So I'm gonna try to get a video out next week or maybe the week after if things are too busy about Embark. We've talked about Embark on the live streams before, but it's a really interesting package that could be kind of a critical piece of your workflow if you use it correctly. So I wanna make a video sort of talking about how you can use Embark in the way that it's meant to be used, and just give you some ideas on how you might want to use it. Alejandro says, is anyone else having some buffering or glitching? Yes, I'm having buffering and glitching. I'm seeing it on my live feed right now, so hopefully it's not gonna persist too much. Let's see. And looking forward to getting that out. Also, I'm gonna be starting back up on the Flux Harmonic channel soon. Maybe next week, maybe the week after next. It really just depends on how soon I'm able to put something together. When I left off, right, when I stopped streaming on that channel, I basically said that my plan going forward isn't to stream as much as to make like actual videos. So I'm gonna start making videos again on that channel. So if you were interested in any of the things I was doing on that channel, like building kind of hackable creativity tools, or building a scheme-like language implementation from scratch, or any of that stuff, definitely keep an eye out for those new videos. And if you haven't heard of the channel, definitely go check it out. It's youtube.com/fluxharmoniclive. And keep an eye out, because I'm going to be starting back up. I'm going to do sort of like a recap of everything we had done up until now. And then we're going to start off on some very specific angles on the existing projects that we were already working on. So it's sort of like a season 2, as I think Ross, someone who's been watching the videos and commenting on them recently, he put it as season 2. So it would be sort of like a season 2 of Flux Harmonic. Ashra says, now that you have a permanent office streaming place, it's probably time for a dedicated streaming machine with a capture card. That way you can go back to EXWM and don't have to worry about streams. Yeah, I'm actually planning to get a desktop machine that would use as the recording device, basically. I'm using another laptop as a recording device right now, and I don't think that it's holding up very well. I've got 100% CPU pegged right now for some reason. No idea why, but yeah, we're definitely gonna improve the setup now that I have the ability to do so. I'm very looking forward to that, actually. EXWM, I don't know if I'll go back, because I had other issues that weren't really related to streaming, but I don't know, I might. We'll see. I've been enjoying Herbstluft. Here we go again. So I might stick with it. We'll see. EXWM is pretty convenient, but there's obvious issues with it that I've talked about at length before. Last thing I want to mention is that at the last stream, I mentioned that I've got a new partnership with Mickey Peterson, who's the author of Mastering Emacs. Kind of a cool way to support the channel and also learn a lot more about Emacs at the same time is to check out his book, Mastering Emacs. If you use this link here, masteringemacs.org/r/systemcrafters, then it actually, part of this, the purchase of that book will actually be allotted to the channel. So it's kind of a nice way to support what we're doing here if you are interested in doing so, and also if you want to read that excellent book. A lot of people mentioned the last time I brought it up that they learned a lot of things from it. It goes pretty deep into a lot of topics I haven't gotten into yet. So definitely give that a look if you want a really good resource for learning Emacs in addition to this channel. Okay. Well, Case makes a good point. Maybe it's the heat making your computer freak out. Yes, that's very likely. Both of my computers are like effectively melting right now because, let me see, what's the temperature right now where I'm at? So it's 36 degrees Celsius, which is probably pretty close to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And I don't have air conditioning, so it's quite hot in this room. I don't think the computers are coping very well with that. About Herbstluft, it's pronounced perfection, Derek says, I tried EXWM for a while and had to go back to i3. Yeah, I used i3 in the beginning and then eventually figured out how to use EXWM for me. and it worked pretty well. Peter says, anyone on the stream doesn't have mastering Emacs yet? Well, I'm sure there's probably plenty of people who don't have it yet, but I'm sure there's also just as many who do have it. So yeah, it's pretty well known in the Emacs community, that's for sure. Okay, so today's topic is basically, I called it distilling the essence of Emacs. We'll get into more of what I mean by that, but as you may have already suspected, Emacs is probably the most hackable and customizable program that's ever existed. And I don't know that that's kind of a strong statement to make, but I think it would be pretty hard to find something that doesn't live up to the same level of hackability that Emacs has. It's very, very unique. But how does Emacs actually accomplish that? So today I would actually like to spend some time discussing the unique aspects of Emacs that enable this ultimate hackability so that we can basically produce a blueprint for other programs that might hope to replicate what Emacs has accomplished. And I really want to get your ideas and feedback about sort of all the aspects of this so that I don't miss anything, because I've got my sort of set of things in mind that I think are the key aspects to Emacs hackability, but there's so many things in Emacs that it's very easy to forget all of them. So I'm looking to all of you to do this as well, or contribute ideas and thoughts about certain things that you think are key to Emacs hackability, so that we don't miss any possible ideas here. And the purpose for discussing this is that I'd really like to experiment with building Emacs-like applications for other use cases. So the project that we've been working on the Flux Harmonic channel is basically a program for creating graphics, like basically thumbnail graphics, or potentially even animated graphics for maybe videos, like motion graphics is what they call it, basically, like any kind of animations you see in a video, and even getting down eventually to creating a video editor, like a custom hackable video editor. And up until now, everything's been focused on sort of just writing code to accomplish that, to basically describe all the things. But a lot of times having a user interface is pretty helpful. So I wanted to try to come up with a way to make an interface for this program, or this kind of program, that is inspired heavily by how Emacs operates. And to do that, I needed to think of all the ways that Emacs is hackable so that I could try to take as many of those ideas and put them together into such a program. So if you are interested in this idea of having more programs that are hackable like Emacs, definitely check out the stuff that we're going to work on Flux Harmonic, because that's basically going to be the focus going forward, at least in the short term, because I'm very interested in this idea. Let me see what's going on in the chat here. Yeah, Ashra says 36C is around 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah, pretty hot. Bo Yuan says it's about 40 degrees Celsius in Shanghai. Wow, that's super, super hot. Oh, and one thing Peter mentions, which is really good about mastering Emacs, is if you buy it, you get free updates on the content. Like as new versions of Emacs come out, Mickey always updates it, and you get the newest version as well. Ashraz mentions malleable systems, the post called The Most Successful Malleable System in History by Conrad Henson. Yeah, but Benoit also mentioned that in IRC right before the stream, so definitely good to look into malleable systems if you're interested in this idea. Amalvadia says, when we say Emacs is the most hackable, what does that mean? What sets it apart from other programs that are configured in full programming language and therefore have the power of the full language behind them? That's basically what we're trying to figure out in this stream. All right, so first of all, let's talk about the user interface, because that's the thing you're looking at most of the day. And please feel free to suggest other ideas for things to add to all of these sections. I'm just sort of going to talk about each of these bullet points, but we can add other bullet points, maybe expand on each of them as we go through. So first of all, the text-focused interface. Now, this is something that is kind of specific to what you might consider like Linux Geek or Unix Geek programs, or programmer-centric programs where you have it be mainly text-based or text-focused in the case of Emacs. There are certain aspects about this that are very effective for making a hackable program. There's no user interface like buttons or UI elements that have to be organized on the screen, or not too many of them really. There's some essential elements to the Emacs user interface, like let's say the mode line, the echo area, the mini buffer, various different things like that. But you don't have like very complex rendered UI. Basically, it's mostly just text written to the screen, maybe with some layout involved. So I think this actually does a lot to help with the hackability of Emacs, because a person who wants to add their own extension to Emacs, or maybe wants to do a little bit of customization here and there, doesn't have to be any kind of UI expert or UI development expert, or maybe a designer or anything like that. Everything's mostly text focused, and you're also mainly working with text buffers if you're editing text. Even things like org mode, which has a little bit more structure around what text you see on the screen, where you have headings that can be folded, etc. Or even something like Magit, where you have a whole interface that's based on text. Like if I were to pull that up right now. So everything's really just based on text, but it's an interface. You could say it's a user interface because there's different sections to it. There's different things you can click on, quote unquote. You can press enter on certain things. Then there's command panels that pop up. So there is an interface, but it's not what a traditional computer user would expect to see. I think that this does have a lot to do with how Emacs is more hackable or moldable compared to other programs, like let's say VS Code or any other IDE. Because if you wanted to make an extension for VS Code or any of the JetBrains editors or any other kind of graphical editor, you would have to know something about user interfaces, or you'd have to at least figure out how to do a user interface in such a program or hook into certain user interface elements. At least with Emacs, I feel like there are clear extensibility points that don't require a whole lot of effort, so it lowers the barrier of entry for people to start hacking on things in Emacs. So I think that's a kind of a big deal. Now, obviously, modern Emacs, which you're looking at it right now, it's like the graphical Emacs effectively, has the ability to have text of different sizes, icons on the screen, images in a buffer, etc. So you can do things that are more like user interfaces. There's even a concept of a button in Emacs, but it's not really like a heavily used thing. The customization interface has a lot of user interface elements that are still pretty text focused. But I don't think that ever really gets too far out of the realm of it being a text focused interface, even though there are sort of graphical elements to it. So that's a pretty important aspect, I think. Anybody have any thoughts on that? So I'll go ahead and move on to the next one while people are thinking about that. Also, defining user-facing actions as commands. I think this is a pretty major one for Emacs, because not only is this great for package authors or maybe just built-in functionality, but it also is very easy for a user of Emacs to add their own new commands. And when I say command, I basically mean just a function that is defined as a command, or like an interactive command, where you can have a key binding that's attached to it, and also you could raise prompts from the function so that whenever the user runs it, you can prompt them for certain pieces of information. So I think that this ability to, and also meta X, if you press Alt X inside of inside of Emacs, you get the list of basically all the commands that are available to you. So that by itself is a very useful thing, because if you're trying to discover new functionality that you haven't seen yet, being able to go through this list of commands can be very useful. So an Emacs-like program definitely would, I feel that it would probably want to have such a list of commands that you could easily go through to learn about things you might want to do, or turn certain features on and off, etc. Now, this has become more of a common thing in graphical IDEs, like let's say Sublime Text or VS Code, where you do have like this command palette. So you have the ability to see all the various different commands that can be executed by the user. But to actually add a new command to show up in that command palette, it requires like writing an entire extension. At least with Emacs, you can go into the scratch buffer and just define a command and then have it show up there, and also put it in your init.el file, just your regular configuration file, to pull to add that as something that you can run anytime, and even bind a key to it to run it whenever you want. So it just continues on this path of making Emacs something that is very easy for the average user to extend and add functionality to. Let's see, Peter says, I think the text orientation restricts the UI language so it does not become too big. With graphical apps, the space to express ideas becomes exponentially bigger, and that works against it. Yeah, definitely. That's a big aspect of introducing more user interface into a program, especially if you're trying to make it extensible, is that there's more things that the user has to learn, and there's more complexity whenever it comes to introducing new user interfaces. Benoit says text focus enables composability, which is harder with GUI. Yeah, that's true too. Though in Emacs, I can't think, aside from like the mode line or maybe tab bar mode, I can't really think of many places where it's easy to customize the text that gets displayed around a particular element. So it's not so easy to like hook into anything in the UI. Let's say inside of org mode buffers, if you wanted to add some text at the end of every heading line, I think it's doable with overlays or with custom code, but it's not super easy to do that, or maybe it's not straightforward for the average user. It's definitely doable though. I'm just trying to think about whether it'd be easier to do that in a graphical application if you had extensibility points. Maybe it doesn't really matter too much. Maybe it's sort of more of a matter of how you extend it rather than just the interface style. Case says, I agree, Peter. Plus, it improves over a plain terminal by allowing for rich text formatting and upgrades to images where needed. Yeah, rich text formatting makes Emacs look a whole lot better whenever you're trying to have a richer interface, for sure. Ashra says, speaking about MetaX, I love the new MetaX from 28.1. What's different about it? I don't remember what's different about it. I've been out of the loop a little bit. Hey, Fade. Ashra says, what's the most often used command within Emacs? I guess self-insert command? Probably, yeah, because it's used for all typing, I think. Ashra says, dragging windows around with a mouse is a lot easier on GUI-driven editors like VS Code or Qt Creator. Yeah, definitely easier to move things around, but you can, I mean, you can't drag windows around per se in Emacs, but you can at least, grab in between windows and move the handle of the frame around or the window around, which is good. So the flexibility of the mini buffer, I think the mini buffer is probably one of the most key elements of the interface of Emacs, because it's a place where you put in a lot of your input for various different commands, but it also gives you the completion environment. I mean, sort of like the default completion system, or yeah, whatever you want to call it. The default way that Emacs prompts you for things and gives you completions for whatever you're typing in is very basic looking, but whenever you have packages like Vertigo or Ivy, Helm, Selectrum, the whole cast of those various different packages, what's Prot's called, MCE. It really makes it much more powerful, because if you have a good package set up for the mini buffer, you can do things like type in, let's say, dot crafter, and just get all the commands related to dot crafter in your MetaX. Or if you want to load up a file, you can have really nice readout of all your information about the various files that you're looking at in a particular folder. The mini buffer is, I think, one of the key elements to using Emacs efficiently, and it's also one of the things that might be really hard to get right in a different type of program. So if you're thinking about a graphics editor program, and if the user is primarily using a mouse to click around, drag things around, make things bigger, draw shapes, etc., then switching to the keyboard to enter things in may not be something that is very palatable. But if you have a Emacs-like program for graphical creation, maybe you do make it more keyboard focused so that you can keep the user at the keyboard and not really have to use the mouse so much. That's sort of the thing I would prefer to do, because I think that the mouse, while you can be very precise with it, it's also kind of finicky. So you might have more actual precision if you have really good key bindings and commands for finely controlling things. So I want to experiment with the possibility of making a really good keyboard-focused interface for graphics editing, video editing, etc. So if you have that, if you have a very keyboard-focused interface, then it's much easier to use something like a mini buffer to show all the possible commands, or do file operations like you want to save the file from somewhere or load it from somewhere, or prompt the user for any specific thing. So putting a mini buffer in a program is not so hard, but making it work well with the program and the way that the user uses the program is, I think, the harder thing. But it's very important, I think, to using the program effectively and efficiently. Ashra says the mini buffer is also within Sublime inspired editors, like basically the command palette in VS Code, Sublime Text, Qt Creator, etc. Yes, definitely, but I don't think it's as customizable. I mean, at least I know more about VS Code because I've written extensions for VS Code before, and you can do arbitrary prompting there, but you don't have a whole lot of control over how the prompting works. So I think Emacs does a better job of that. But I think that there are aspects of Emacs that actually work in the advantage of the mini buffer, like for instance about being able to set certain ranges of text as read-only so that you can't delete the prompt text, and then having all of your same editing commands available while typing there, being able to display any text you want below the prompt, etc. So it's hard to get the same kind of Emacs experience, I think, in those programs. Fade says this is an idea from Lisp machines. APL, here we come. I haven't used that, but yeah, I'm sure that Lisp machines have done a lot of stuff. Wow, Sherry is back. All right, that's a blast from the past. Hello, Sherry. Fade says the Common Lisp Interface Manager was defined to build these kinds of interfaces. I'll have to look at that. I haven't read into that very much. Yeah, Sherry is back. So then we go on to things like theming and visual customization with faces. Actually, before I do that, let me jump into what Fade just mentioned. Let's just take a look at some things to do some research while we're talking about this. So the Common Lisp Interface Manager. It's a Common Lisp-based programming interface for creating user interfaces based on CLOS. Let's see. So I'm just looking at this this screenshot here. Yeah, you define a function in a REPL, but then there's some command you could put in, show directory. It just seems kind of a weird way to do that, but maybe it's just sort of like a prototypical invocation of such a thing, and maybe the way that you do it in practice isn't just typing it directly into the REPL. I don't think most people want to type directly into a REPL all day, but I guess people use a shell all day too. I don't really do that, so. But definitely interesting to look into the design of this for anyone who wants to make Lisp-based user interfaces. Let's see, table formatting. I'm just curious, like, what this... Okay, that's kind of cool. It's just like a imperative function for drawing certain things. Interesting. I have to look at that more. Sherry says, when you have time, look up New Physics with Joseph George. He's on YouTube. We have a different theory on dark matter and black holes. Any help, we'd appreciate it. Thank you so much. Wow. I know nothing about those things, so someone else will have to comment on that. All right, so visual customization. Emacs has the whole faces system, which is really interesting to me because it basically means that any text you see on the screen can be customized with what's called a face, and faces have inheritance so that you can inherit one face from another and be able to reuse the styles of various different things. So if you look at describe face in Emacs, there's like a whole list of all the various different faces for things in Emacs. And you can change any of them very easily using the customization interface. Like if I were to go to the highlight face, you can see that there's an interface here that says what the foreground color is, background color is, basically anything you would want to do to customize how the highlight looks whenever you highlight something in Emacs. Like let's say, for instance, not in MetaX, but if I select text on the screen, oh, not even that. Anyway, the point being, there are specific faces that are available in Emacs for certain interface elements, like the mode line, any text in a buffer, maybe syntax highlighting, etc. And if you want to customize that, all you have to do is just set the details of the face that you want to customize. And then all of your themes are basically built around this concept where they are just a set of key value pairs, effectively, for a given face, customize these certain details about it. And then you just save that as a theme, and you can load it up in any other instance of Emacs. So this kind of thing would be very useful in any kind of program that wants to be hackable like Emacs. It's very easy to do this in web-based applications because HTML and CSS effectively are the same thing. You have CSS, which defines all of the classes for various different things you might represent in the HTML file. It's just that Emacs has its own sort of concept of how faces work against text that's being displayed. If you were to do this in a more graphical application, it would probably be similar to CSS effectively. I mean, it's still the same thing. You have various properties that you are setting, but with faces at least, there's a very specific set of things about text that needs to be changed. For user interface elements, there may be different properties that need to be set for different types of user interface elements. So it's a little bit more complex to think about how you might customize a full graphical interface. Hey, Gun. Mjolnir says, Doom has been doing some neat profile stuff lately. Yeah, I saw that Doom got support for loading different profiles, basically like Emacs 2. I haven't looked into it yet, but I did see that happen. Let's see. Fade says, CLIM is displaying the ID of that screenshot is displaying the ID of presentations, which can be attached to any text. Emacs also uses this idea, basically like text properties. So the interface manager will display the presentation in an appropriate visual way depending on its type. Yeah, that's a good way to do it, I think. I mean, if you just have like an object of a certain type and you associate a particular presentation to it, then whenever you try to print that thing out, it will be displayed in that way. Case asks, is it in its own namespace like faces are in Emacs? And Fate says, well, in Common Lisp, every class also defines a type of the same name. And CL has namespaces for pretty much every kind of thing. Yeah. I guess that's good. I kind of like how Scheme doesn't have different namespaces for different types of things, but it causes its own problems, I suppose. Fade says, by default, a CLIM application includes a listener, which is a Lisp REPL at the bottom of the screen, like a mini buffer. Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so it basically just has an ever-present REPL. So definitely, I think that this ability to easily customize the visual look of Emacs with faces is pretty key, but not critical for an application that wants to be like Emacs. You don't have to have interface theming necessarily. It's something that people will want eventually if they want to use your application long term, but I don't think it's fully critical. But being able to describe the display of certain things could be useful. Also, there's window and frame management in Emacs, which is pretty important because if you have a complex, or I guess a program that enables complex workflows, you need a way to manage all the things that you see on the screen at any given time or in different desktop environment windows. Frame is basically a desktop environment window. So Emacs gives you basically a tiling window manager inside the program. You can do arbitrary splits of your windows, like got a vertical split here, horizontal split there, etc., etc. So it's pretty flexible, and there's also ways you can customize how new windows pop up using things like display buffer a list, display buffer a list, and the other sort of related variables for that. I think that an Emacs-like application needs to be pretty flexible in terms of how the user can display things on the screen, in terms of, you know, like splitting the window into 2 frames or things like that. If you look at a program like Blender, which is very, very flexible, it's not super hackable in the way that Emacs is, but it's very, very flexible. You can basically just drag out an arbitrary number of panels inside of the program and put whatever you want anywhere. Another sort of aspect of this is there needs to be a way to define sort of like a view that could be shown in any of these window panes. Blender has this concept. In Emacs, at least, you have major modes that sort of define what a particular buffer does or how things in it are displayed or just how it behaves in general. So any Emacs-like program probably would need a way to say, like, for a given pane that's open, what is sort of like the core thing being displayed there, so that you have that control of, like, okay, in this window I want to display this thing, and in this window I want to display this other thing effectively. Fade says, this is why CL is a Lisp 2 and Scheme is a Lisp 1. Yeah, I think CL is more like a Lisp N, right? If it has namespaces for various different things. Ashra says, doesn't Blender have a Python API that allows you to do anything you would via the user interface? Yes, you can definitely script a lot of the functionality in Blender. I just don't know how easy it is to add arbitrary UI through the Python interface, but maybe all of it's done through the Python interface. I should really look into that and see what does Blender do. Let's see. How does Blender accomplish UI extensibility? So is there anything I missed in terms of user interface? Like any key elements of the user interface that contribute to the hackability of Emacs? Obviously, the mode line is something, you know, you can put whatever you want. It's kind of nice. But a program doesn't necessarily need a mode line to be hackable like Emacs. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that you could say that would be a key hackable user interface element. The tab bar mode has sort of come in that area recently because you can do like a global mode line there effectively. And Hunter Jaws says the widget library. You mean like the X widget thing where you can put in X widgets anywhere? I don't know exactly what other widget library there might be, unless you're talking about like the user interface elements of Emacs. But one question we could think about as a result of talking about all these things, could you make a more graphical representation or more, you know, sort of UI driven program and still have it be as effective and hackable as Emacs? I guess a question about how Blender works could help answer that. And maybe some of the stuff in the CLIM that Fade brought up could be pretty useful to answer that question. I just realized I don't have the chat on the screen of the stream. I think I don't have that thing set up in this other computer. Sorry about that. So I would like to know the answer to that question. It's something that I'm going to try to experiment with. I think that if you can have a relatively simple UI representation that doesn't require a lot of complex layout, then it's possible. The other thing that matters, at least to me, is how do you make a UI that works well on a desktop PC and a mobile device? It has to be pretty simple. It can't be overly complicated because it needs to be able to adjust to the different screen sizes or screen orientation. So if you have a desktop PC, usually you have everything in a wide layout, but on a mobile device, if you're using it in normal portrait mode as you're holding it in your hand, then it's, you know, in a portrait layout. So how do you make a hackable UI that is responsive to different types of UIs? So that's something that I'm interested in, and I don't have a really good answer for it at the moment. I'll turn the volume down. I think I'm clipping. Kay says, regarding the mode line, I feel like you need something to give you status. Yeah, usually a status bar you'll see in a lot of applications probably is something you want. You need a way to be notified about things that are happening, or maybe like there's some status information that needs to be displayed. So I would probably put something like a mode line in, but it might be more like a status bar than a mode line in the way that it's being displayed, I think. Hello to Creeper and Robert. Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be back as well. Fade says, the downside to Lisp 2 is that if you're referring to the function list and it isn't in the function call position, you need to refer to the function object. Yeah. That is one thing I don't like as much about having separate namespaces for functions and variables, etc. I like that about Scheme, where you can just have a variable that has a function object inside of it and pass it to another function for like higher order functions. Aesthetically, it looks better to me to do that, but I don't really know that it, it's necessary. It's another thing I need to experiment with a little bit while I'm making my own programming language for this purpose. Okay, next thing, key bindings. I don't have as much on this one because it's not a very complex issue to talk about, but one of the things that's very important about Emacs is that you have access to pretty much anything you want to do via key bindings. There's nothing that, I don't think there's anything in Emacs that you can do only with a mouse. There's plenty that you can do with a keyboard that you can't necessarily do with the mouse, but I don't think there's anything you can do without the keyboard. So, to make a really good keyboard focused interface, you need a really robust key binding system, and that's what Emacs has with the prefix key system, where you have a key map that's bound to a prefix key like Control X or Control C, and then whenever you press that prefix key, then you have access to a key map where there's a whole new set of keys that you can press. You can do like key sequences effectively. And also, you can just have keys that are bound to a single key, like the letter A is typically bound to self-insert. Is that what it is? And put this into Emacs mode. So Control H, K, I'm gonna press the letter A. It's bound, okay, this is org self-insert command, but if I were to go into, let's say the scratch buffer, put it in Emacs mode, Control H, K, press the letter A. Ha! Okay, so it's not exactly so simple. If I go into a text buffer, let's see, can I find a text file? Projects code. How many text files in here? What about a SH file? Let's see. Control HKA. Self-insert command. Okay, so even individual letters have key bindings that call specific commands. In this case, the letter A is calling self-insert command as a way to insert the letter A into the buffer. So Emacs goes pretty far with this whole concept of binding keys, and the result of that is that you can totally change the input style. You can totally change how you interact with the program with the keyboard to do things like, invent evil mode or anything else like that, because you have the ability to bind any key to any command. So you don't need a prefix map per se. There's the global key map that is like basically a prefix map for any top level keys or even top level prefix keys. But the flexibility and power of this design of having the prefix key system, I think, is really key to having a very robust keyboard driven interface. So a program that wants to be like Emacs, this is going to be one of the primary things it's going to have to do. It's going to have a robust key binding system that allows you to bind keys directly to commands that are defined in the extensibility language of the program. In this case, Emacs Lisp, or for any other program, it would be whatever language is used to extend it. But it's very important, and it's given us the ability in Emacs, at least, to have so many different packages for customizing your workflow as it relates to how you use your keyboard. So there's Evil mode, obviously. There's, let's see, what else? Oh, yeah, let's also talk about mode maps. That's also a very important thing. Thanks, Gun. God mode is another one. So Emacs, God mode. There are other ones I'm thinking of, and I can't remember the names for them right now. Didn't Ryu / make something for this? If I'm not mistaken. There's some package they have. Or is it someone else I'm thinking of? Anyway, there's so many ways that you can use Emacs key bindings differently. There's also like Ergo Emacs, which is like a completely different key binding set for Emacs. So many different ways to change how the program works. I think that's one of the reasons why Emacs gets so many people that are kind of stuck to Emacs and can't get out. You know, I don't mean like you can't exit them. I mean like you can't stop using Emacs because it's so convenient based on the way that you've set up your key bindings and the way that you use the system, because it's so flexible. Gun says if evil weren't there, I'd still be with them. Let's see. And Gun says, and these transient modes listing the key bindings like in Magic, yeah, or anything else like even Embark that is able to do key binding lists. Like let's say if I press Control X and then Control H, Embark is giving me this nice little listing of the key bindings under that prefix key. Super important stuff, I think. The other thing that Gun reminded me of is mode maps. So any major or minor mode can also have its own key map that gets overlaid on the current buffer that you're in. So a major mode is sort of controls the behavior of the current buffer, but there could be local minor modes in the buffer that also add certain key maps, and there could also be global minor modes that add global key bindings as well. And that's another way for a user to add their own customizations to Emacs, or to load up packages that have key binding customizations that are very flexible. So, excuse me. There's just so many different ways that key bindings play a role in making Emacs super hackable and effective in being a keyboard-driven program. But then I guess that all begs the question, does a program need such an extensibility to control key bindings to be considered hackable? I mean, I guess so long as you can define your own commands and have a consistent way to access them, it can be considered hackable. But I think that as far as creating a workflow, being able to create your own custom key bindings and rearrange things however you want is very important for perfecting a workflow. So I think that it is needed. I think key bindings are a very important part of having an Emacs inspired program that is very keyboard driven. All right, so probably the most important part of having a hackable program like Emacs would be the extension language. And we're going to talk about sort of like what the unique aspects of Emacs Lisp are that make it especially effective as a configuration language. There's a few different things. Oh, maybe I should say that here. A few different things here that are sort of controversial from a language design standpoint, but I think they may actually play into the hackability of Emacs via Emacs Lisp. The first one being the lack of module namespaces. Now, this is actually something that people complain about quite a lot with Emacs. And when I say module namespaces, what I mean is when you have an Emacs package and you load it up, everything just gets dumped into the global namespace. There's no separate namespace where like you can import various commands from a specific namespace. Like let's say the Magic package exports commands, but it only wants to export a very specific subset of its commands that it has through a particular module that you load into your configuration file. Emacs doesn't have that. If you load Magic, if you load one of the features of Magic, all those commands just show up globally. And I actually do think that this is one of the benefits of Emacs Lisp, because it does give you that ability just to see anything you could possibly want to see in the list of commands in the meta-x listing. There's a lot of things you can discover there by doing that, and you don't really get that if you have things hidden away in modules that you have to import on purpose into your configuration. But still, I think from a software engineering standpoint, a lot of people have said that it would be better if Emacs Lisp did have some idea of like module namespaces so that you can not have everything be loaded into the global namespace all the time. But I don't think it's been enough of a problem because, you know, people just solve this by having prefixes on their commands to identify that it's part of a particular package. So let's see. Hello, Stefan. You could do worse than being stuck with Emacs. Yeah, you could definitely do worse than that. Let's see. Fade says, I guess Plan 9 invented a pretty hackable, nearly completely mouse-driven interface with the SAM editor. I've never tried it. I've tried to watch a video about it, and I wasn't really convinced. Peter says lack of namespaces is not a feature. Yeah. I mean, if you want a well-designed language, then you definitely want to have namespaces. Just keep things organized. Fade says, let's see, what is... I know gods like Rob Pike still use it. Although Plan 9 still uses Bucky bits to change the command being called with a mouse. I don't know what that is. Yeah, Gun says, that's why you fake it like with dw/foo-bar. Yeah, definitely. You just, you know, have your own little nomenclature for how you define your functions and your commands to have them be in a separate sort of namespace of their own. But they're still all in the global namespace. MouseX, I don't know if that's the way you pronounce your name. Having a workaround doesn't mean that it's a good situation. Having a spare tire doesn't make you leap in joy when you have a flat tire. Yes, it's not ideal. That's why, for me, with the language that I'm making for this sort of purpose, there are module namespaces, for sure. You have to import things. Fade says, Emacs Lisp really wants to be Common Lisp because when RMS defined its semantics, he was a Mac Lisp user. Yeah, well, definitely Emacs Lisp was very, very inspired by Common Lisp. It's not really Common Lisp, but then you have the Common Lisp compatibility layer that adds a lot of stuff that people get a lot of use out of. I haven't really used a lot of the Common Lisp stuff in Emacs. Eric says, I love Lua or really Fennel for extension language everywhere. I haven't used Lua much, but I know that it is very good as an embedded scripting language. There's also a really cool project called LuaJIT, which is the just-in-time compiler they use for compiling down to native machine code, which I'm kind of interested in looking into using in the future. All right, let's see here. Minas Mazar says, in Emacs, the real problem in having plugins, packages, modules, and not a namespace is they cannot be dropped out at runtime. Yeah, you can't unload something, that's for sure. But Lisps typically have that problem because everything is just a big ball of mutable state. You could have module namespaces where you kind of keep things a little bit contained. You could reload them, but as soon as you... Well, in Common Lisp, I don't think it's as much of a problem because you do have separate namespaces. This may be one of the saving graces of separate namespaces for functions and variables, in my opinion. Because in Common Lisp, because you can't just pass a function as a variable to something else and have it be called, you completely sidestep the problem of someone capturing an instance of an old function in a closure somewhere and not being able to replace it. So the fact that you have to pass around the name of a function using a symbol and then invoke it somehow, I think that actually saves you from this problem. And that gives you the ability to do reloadable modules, I think. But you don't have the same capability with variables. But variables, at least, you can still potentially capture those, but if you reload like a Lisp package, I think typically you're just setting the same variable over again. So a little bit different. Case says, oh, I like having a ton of symbols in one big hairy ball of state. Yeah, of course. Yoder says, no barrier between internals and extension API, a double-edged sword, but it probably makes Emacs what it is. Yes, well, I mean, to be super hackable, you kind of have to have it be dangerous, because otherwise you won't be able to do some of the amazing hacks that are possible in Emacs. Case says, I cannot get into Fennel. It's just, I don't know if I recall it was meant to be more like Clojure. Yeah, the syntax is very inspired by Clojure. Fennel, I don't know if Fennel was created by Technomancy, who's also a Clojurist, but I think Technomancy contributes to it at least. So definitely Clojure vibes. Fade says, this gives rise to very long-running systems because you can hot patch everything while the program still runs. Oh, and he also says, this namespacing means you can redefine a class when a program is running and all instances of the class are updated in runtime. Yeah, that is a benefit. I mean, with a scheme implementation, it's harder to do this unless you build some affordances into the language for it. It's tough. I like sort of the elegance and what I consider to be the simplicity of Scheme by comparison to Common Lisp, but it does cause problems for reloadability, I think, or hot patching. But that's something that I want to think about and try to implement in my language. Okay, that was the first thing. Simplicity of libraries. So this is sort of a corollary to what I was saying before. Libraries are simple in that you basically just have an Emacs Lisp file and you write a bunch of code in it, and then you just have a provide statement at the bottom. Like, let's say find library live crafter. So I load up the live crafter library. That's something loaded in Emacs, and it's just this provide live crafter at the bottom. It's a pretty simple concept. So long as the file's in your load path, then you can just use like require live-crafter to load it up. Okay, that didn't work, but whatever. The point is, it's pretty straightforward to use. It's not like a what you might consider a full-fledged programming language where you have to have import statements at with namespace paths, etc. So it's simpler for someone to get started with if they want to learn how to build Emacs packages. But it's also like if you're a programmer and you're used to these kinds of things, it is a little bit weird because library is not what you expect it to be called. And I mean, require makes sense. You require something in the code, but provide doesn't really make sense as a concept. So I don't know. Peter says, safety is overrated. Give me a foot gun every day. Not for everyone though. Yeah, well, if you are making things for yourself, and you're trying to make an environment work for you, having some danger definitely helps because it gives you the ability to accomplish your goals. But if you're trying to like ship production software, you don't want that. You want safety. You want there to be some guardrails so that you don't get yourself into trouble. So there is a difference to it all. Hooks as a core extensibility point. I think this is a pretty useful thing about Emacs. Makes Emacs kind of event-driven in that, when certain things happen, like a particular mode gets loaded, there's a hook that you can attach a function to so that it gets called. So you can do things like load more auxiliary modes or set variables or set certain things up the way you want. I think for a Emacs-like hackable program, you definitely want to have something like hooks because it will give you that ability to, or give the user an ability to add their own customizations to various different things that happen. So hooks aren't very complicated. A hook is effectively just a variable that holds a list of functions to be called when a certain thing happens. So it's not really a high cost thing to implement, but it's nice to have it. It enables you to do a lot of things without having to do hacky stuff. It gives you a legitimate extensibility point for a lot of behavior. Let me see. Let me just go put this right up here. I'll move it here. Also, corollary to that is you can hook or hack any function with advice. So if you haven't really used advice before, advice gives you a lot of flexibility in redefining behavior. And also Ashraz and Pyotr both mentioned advice here. So with advice, you can basically inject a function to be called before or after another function, or just wrap around an entire function so you can change the inputs and the outputs. Um, it basically allows you to customize anything, and it's a huge foot gun because if you start messing around in there, you could break fundamental Emacs behavior and have to like restart the program, which is fine. I mean, if you're doing that kind of stuff, you're sort of, you know that you could get into that problem. But if someone else writes a package that uses a lot of advice and you load it, it could break your stuff pretty badly if it's not written well. So, but having the ability to affect the behavior of any function lets you change whatever you want. And it's not something that I use very often, but it's something that is nice to have because when you need to get yourself out of trouble or you have something you really want to implement and the package you're using doesn't do it, you can more than likely make it happen yourself. Also, you can redefine any function no matter where it's defined, as long as it wasn't a C function. So if there's some behavior you don't like, or if there's a bug that you found in a package, you can just copy the code, fix the bug, and then put it in your config.el. So long as it gets loaded after that package gets loaded, you can just redefine the behavior and fix the function yourself. So you have total control over everything. It's something that is very, very rare to see in programs. Even programs that give you extensibility capabilities, like let's say Sublime Text. I'm not sure how possible it is to excuse me, to override existing behavior, even stuff that comes from the editor itself. But in Emacs, you can do it for sure. Case says the non-docstringness of portable scheme is annoying. Well, yeah, that scheme is not made. Scheme is made with a very specific mindset. They basically want to make a lean computational system that can have functionality built on top. But I think if you want to have a scheme language that is more Emacs-like, you need to have a way to attach documentation. I think Guile probably does a pretty good job of that. Let's see. Ashra says, which is more or less the reason why packages should not change anything when you require or load them. Only on a user interaction shall the new package change the user experience. Yeah, definitely. Peter says advices are actually a superpower of Emacs. Yeah, very, very important functionality. For a program that wants to implement Emacs style behavior, it would be nice to have that. But the more complicated the program is, the more dangerous, I guess you could say, it is to have advice that allows you to change any function. But it would give you the same level of flexibility to change any behavior you want. So it is something that might be necessary. If you have a language that has legitimate module namespaces, it's harder to replace functions in something like that unless you have the ability to enter a particular module namespace. If the user has the ability to enter a particular module namespace using a command of some sort, and then evaluate the function in that context, which is something I do have in Mesh. Haven't used it a whole lot yet. Ashra says, you can also change the C function, just takes a little bit more time. Or you might just redefine the defun with Lisp, but that might yield other shenanigans. Yeah, maybe you could actually redefine the function with Emacs Lisp. I haven't tried that before, but it could be possible. Because if they don't protect those C functions, the symbols of the C functions from being replaced, then you could definitely replace the C function. Okay. Core program behavior, buffers, windows, frames are represented as first-class objects. So this is something more along the lines of like the programming interface of the program itself, or the extension interface of the program itself, being able to interact with the core elements of the program just like any other part of the code. So for instance, like being able to manipulate buffers very easily from within Emacs Lisp, manipulate windows and frames. It comes with this stuff built into Emacs. It's not like a separate package that you have to pull in to give you all those APIs. So if you have a program that is meant to be extensible, you kind of need to have built-in APIs for all of the sort of the core functionality so that someone can just easily open up their configuration file and start messing around with it, or adding their own extensions. So this is not really like a super surprising thing, because like Fade mentioned before, CLIM, you have various different object types that have their own presentation. So you're manipulating objects directly in the language. So you're gonna have this kind of thing, but it is something I wanted to call out, because having buffers be like a first class concept in Emacs does give it some of the extensibility it has, because all of the interfaces that you develop effectively are just buffers. You're just putting text in a buffer, and you're making certain things read only, or you're making certain elements not displayed, or maybe hidden and collapsed and expanded at certain times, or anything like that. So having good APIs for those helps a lot with extensibility for sure. Major and minor modes. It's interesting that this concept hasn't shown up in more places. I mean, I guess probably it has shown up in different ways, but not exactly in the same formulation as I've seen in Emacs. Excuse me. So a major mode is the behavior for a specific buffer, and a minor mode is behavior that could be loaded up at any time in any buffer, maybe even globally in Emacs. I think minor modes are kind of like more interesting to me than major modes, but major modes do provide some pointers to what you would do in a more UI-based program, where you have like a window pane that needs to have something in it. You might have a major mode that controls that. But minor modes are really interesting, because you can do some very simple stuff in minor modes, or you can do some very complicated stuff in minor modes as well. And you can sort of package up a lot of additional behavior into a minor mode that gets loaded whenever it's needed. So I think that for a program that wants to be Emacs-like, having something like major and minor modes would be interesting, though maybe a different name or a better set of names would be helpful for that, because major and minor modes to a non-Emacs user don't make a lot of sense at first. So yeah, definitely having something like minor modes, where it's like behavior that can be turned on easily using a command, would be very important, I think, for an Emacs-like application. Let's see. So Ashraz says, just create your own scheme, Case. Call it doc scheme. And then Case says, I've been wanting to make a Lispy thing with awk. Oh boy. Minas Mazar says, not sure you already did, but I'd like a video about building a minor mode using text properties, building tables like an Elfie with different behaviors on specific portions of buffer, or building pages with forms, buttons like in customization. Yeah, I intended to get something like that, and I never got back around to it in the Learning Emacs Lisp series. That's just one of those series where the further you get into making the series, the less people are watching it, because it's deeper information. That's always the struggle I have on this channel, is like, how much time and effort do I put into a more advanced video that less people are going to watch? I think I just need to start doing it anyway. Ashra says, you mean like tabulated Lisp mode? Yeah, there is a mode you can use called tabulated Lisp mode that gives you some of this behavior by default, which is pretty useful. I've used it a little bit. I think I was using it in that stream I did with JT, using or piping stuff from NewShell into Emacs. Then Ashra has helped me clean up some stuff with it, I think. But yeah, it's definitely pretty useful. Piotr says, Emacs buffer modification API is not so friendly. It reminds me of Logo. I think it actually makes automating specific types of edits easier, because you're basically just doing very, very imperative procedural coding, like insert this text, select this range, replace text, that kind of thing. So it's not the most functional way of doing things, but it's definitely easy to understand if you don't know much about programming, I think. Gunn says, I'm trying to get a major in minor modes. That would be a great thing to put in your like high school yearbook quote. All right. Self-documenting. So that's a big thing about having a program that is meant to be hacked, is that you need it to have good documentation for a lot of the commands and functions that are available inside of it, because there's a very blurry line between what's like a utility function and what's a command that the user might use. So both of them need documentation. And if you have documentation, it gives you the ability to do things like have a command listing where you have sort of like the general description of a particular command. And then you can have things like describe function. Let's look at this map remove function, which gives you the signature of the function, the documentation that you might want to read about it. Then if you have a sufficiently powerful interface, you could also get links directly into the code for that function, which is super useful, I think, and other information from this helpful package. But I think that it's if you want a program that people are going to try to extend, the more that you can add documentation and the ability to read the source, and source is easily accessible. Excuse me. The easier it's going to be for people to hack it. So being able to use describe function, describe variable, or easily jump into the code of any given package, super, super useful for understanding what's going on in Emacs and learning how to even code Emacs Lisp. Ashra says, a problem with Emacs buffer modification is that it's just text. While you have S expressions in paragraphs, you don't have semantic information at that point. Yeah. That is troubling, especially for things like org mode or any other package where you have more elaborate display. You have to resort to things like regular expressions to search for various elements in the buffer to then manipulate them if you want to. So, yeah. Fade says, presentations. Ashra says, a friggin' single point of truth. I'd still love to see an Emacs module that has its texty documentation also generated from the EL, for example, via some special detangle logic. Yeah, that would be nice. Doesn't Elpa do some stuff for that? I'm not sure about that, but let me just check this really quickly. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I thought I had seen Modus. I thought I had seen some documentation like display on an Elpa page somewhere. Manual. Here, right here, Modus themes. There it is. But maybe this is the actual info file. Probably doesn't have it for every package. Let me just check the one I was just on before. Was it Ace window? Yeah, no manual there. So it must require like having an actual manual file. Gunn says, I think documentation is slightly moving away from the traditional info to markdown and or org mode, especially with packages hosted on GitHub. Yes. Though info is pretty useful. I think info, I don't use it to its greatest capability, but I think info is a very nice interface for reading manuals. And you don't really get that with markdown and org files necessarily. Ashra says, but for example, the Modus documentation is in its own orgs/info file. Yeah. Fade says, keeping prose in sync with code is a major source of entropy in living systems. Yeah, that's for sure. I'm still like trying to, okay, I'm not really trying to. I'm still thinking about how I would make a configuration that could be turned into a website without having it be an org file, because I'm sort of just tired of tangled org files, to be honest. All right. Case says, Prot does the most. Yeah, Prot definitely makes sure that all of his packages live up to all the standards of a first-rate GNU package. You can expect any variable or function at any time. Yeah, basically what I had already mentioned before. I mean, that's very important, I think, at least for a person learning the program. If it's a very keyboard heavy program or a very scripting heavy program, being able to look at the functions that are available or any variables that you might want to set for configuration is really critical to learning fast, I think. Also easy to pull in community authored packages. There's package.el and Emacs where you can pull things from the GNU and non-GNU ELPA, which I think is, super useful. I'm glad that the GNU, both GNU and non-GNU ELPA are where they're at right now, because you don't have to really rely on Melpa or other package repositories for Emacs as much. And I also think it's really interesting that you can use alternate methods for pulling in third-party packages, like if you want to use straight.el, or what's that new one that just came out? I forgot. There's like some new package manager that might replace Straight, but I can't remember the name right now. But it's nice that you have these different ways to pull in third-party code to affect your Emacs. And also to even author them. It's pretty easy to author them and put them up online so other people can pull them down, either as a Git repo or as some other type of package. You put it up somewhere. Ashra says, about README info, it's friggin' annoying. Use packages manual basically says, hey, look into the readme.md, which is not distributed via the package. Yeah, that is a problem. It really is necessary to have like a manual that can be read in Emacs for a package. Something that I don't really reach for myself as much, which I should, but it's great to have it in there. So I think a program that wanted to be successful, be like Emacs and also be successful, should have a very clear model for documentation. Let's see. Let me put that actually as a thing. Having a clear documentation. Manual strategy that isn't hard to keep up to date is critical for a hackable application. Okay. So the question I want to ask here, could you still achieve the same hackability with a better language? So let's say you have a real, quote unquote, a real programming language that isn't meant to just be an extension language for a single program, like Emacs Lisp. Do you think you could reach the same level of hackability? Well, obviously, there are languages like Python, which get used very commonly for extensibility of certain programs, like let's say Sublime Text. There's also JavaScript that gets used for things like VS Code or in the past Atom. But it's not just the language that matters. I think there's certain aspects to how the extensibility is authored in the program. Like how did the author of the program imagine that you would extend it? A program like VS Code walls off the extensibility part of the program from the core functionality so that you can't tamper with the core functionality or make it run slower, which is kind of good if you want to have a very stable program, but it's not good if you want to hack pretty much any aspect of functionality. Ashra says, better language? Oh no, the flame wars are calling. I mean, I'm pretty sure that nobody's going to say that Emacs Lisp is the best language. But, whatever. If anybody wants to argue that point, that's fine. But, yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, I think that, a language that's created to be a good extensibility language, but also be an actual programming language at the same time, could be nice. Guile Scheme, I think, was kind of meant to be that. I mean, Guile Scheme has a pretty solid implementation by this point. I mean, they've got a lot of stuff that you want to have if you want a first-rate language. But the problem I have with Guile Scheme is that if you want to include it in a program, you have to link to the library. You have to link to the dynamic library, which means you have to have it available on the system. You can't ship your program with it because then your program has to be GPL, I think. So I don't know, it adds extra complications. It'd be better to have an embeddable language that is a full language, but also at the same time is meant to be used as an extension language and be used in hackable programs effectively. Gun says, VBS? I don't know. What are we... no, I did not say Java scheme. No way. Which scheme? Sorry, which program are we extending with VBS? Excel? Ashra says, so Java. After all, Eclipse can load arbitrary Java packages to extend the functionality. I guess you're right. Yeah, Eclipse is a good example, but Eclipse is also super heavyweight. Chicken scheme. Yeah, Lua is an example. Chicken scheme, I haven't played with it very much, but I just can't get over the name chicken and the fact that the packages are called eggs. I don't know. I can't take myself seriously writing code in that language. I know that's a very stupid reason, and there's a lot of really cool stuff in the implementation of Chicken Scheme because I've read some of the blog posts by the author of Chicken Scheme and useful stuff in there. But yeah, I don't know. Gun says XSLT is also Turing complete. Nobody wants to be writing code in XSLT. Alejandro says, about Emacs Lisp as a good language, I'm writing a package to manage my work files in a consistent way, not only projects or files sitting in my home directory. Message 1 out of 2. I'll read the next one when it comes. Case mentions brainfuck. Nobody wants to write brainfuck. There's no way. Alejandro says, I dare any language platform to do that with a simple scriptable language and a rich environment as Emacs. Yeah. For automating certain types of tasks, the combination of Emacs Lisp and the interface of Emacs is pretty nice, I have to say. Case says chicken compiles down to C, so does Gambit. Yeah, it's a silly reason not to use the language, but that's me, man. What can I say? I have a sense of aesthetics that even goes all the way to the languages that I use. Gambit scheme is pretty cool. Maybe we can just list essential features of a hackable language. I mean, that's sort of what I did, I think, here. But if you have specific ones in mind, please mention them and I'll put them in. Melpa is a great name. Melpa is not a great name. Fade says, are we discussing a new editor project? No, not a text editor. We're talking about, I'm talking about making a, basically like a graphics and video editor, which is what I was doing on the Flux Harmonic channel. I want to make an interface for it, but I wanted to make it hackable like Emacs, basically. Peter says XSLT is fine for what it was designed for, but not for general computing. Yeah, definitely. Steven says LaTeX is Turing complete. Yeah, Turing completeness does not necessarily mean it's a good language for extensibility. PostScript is Turing complete. Jeez. Hey, Osloy. Fourth? I haven't looked at fourth. Lots of stuff we'd never want to use are Turing complete. Yes. So let's see. So what else? Did I miss anything? Is there anything major that I've missed? Like any categories of things that maybe we should have covered that I didn't get to? And also, is there anything that Emacs, like extensibility points in Emacs that really aren't so great? I mean, I think that one thing that was mentioned is that the way you manipulate buffers is not very convenient, especially when you need to have a more structured representation of data. Ashra says, I guess I can see the problem with a language's name, but let's try to C# and be nimble about it. After all, we want to lure new users to this channel, right? Yes. With a nice cup of Java, we will freshen up that rust and enjoy some zigzag discussion about the chicken and egg problem. Jeez, man. I think you've had a decent amount of caffeine this morning. It's not morning for you. You're also in Europe, right? So probably late for a lot of caffeine. Hey, Jason. Case says, Emacs has the dumbest name stuff. Woman, Elfie, Deered. Deered makes sense. Elfeed sort of makes sense. It's not the worst. Yes, Ashra says, I believe the programmer of The Witness, Jonathan Blow, wrote his own programming language to accomplish, what was it? Modify code while the program is running. Well, I mean, that's basically Lisp. But yeah, what's his language called? Jai, I think. I didn't think it was that he was able to reload it while it was running. I thought it was that it just recompiles so fast that he can just hit F5 and restart his application in like less than a second. Benoit says, you spoke about Java. I was on a call. Yeah, we did talk about Java in that context. Yes. Fade brings up a good point. As I see it, Emacs problem largely arises from the historical realities of the design choices taken 40 years ago. So yeah, there's a lot of historical cruft. Let's see, Emacs was designed in a totally different era. Lots of legacy design decisions. And Fade also says, I really wish it wasn't so blocking. Asynchrony should be easier to manage. Not so in Emacs Lisp. Creeper says, do you know about EAF? Yes, I do know about the Emacs application framework. I haven't really used it, but I've heard a lot of people speak positively about it. Peter says, what was not mentioned is that you can hack Emacs in Emacs, which lowers the bar considerably. An edit, compile, run cycle would kill hacking in an instant. Yes, definitely. The fact that you can reevaluate and extend or code and Emacs while the program is running. Program. Very important. Yeah. That's sort of, it's such an assumption on my part by this point that I didn't even think to call it out as an important thing. Benoit says single CPU and single core. Yes, that's the world we live in with Emacs. We're living in 1970s, late 1970s computing. Fade says memory is no longer expensive. Symmetrical machines are not exotic. Yeah, so being able to make use of modern computing resources, more memory, more cores. Yeah, the asynchrony thing is very important. I mean, at least for the language I'm working on, Mesh, I'm trying to think about how I would try to work in continuations into the language for adding asynchronous computation, but also doing it in a way where you don't have to resort to callbacks all the time. The compiler can sort of just hide that away from you, and it more like looks like your code is synchronous when it's not. Jason says discovery of packages is difficult, although you're doing a great job here on System Crafters. Thank you. Case says I could do this all day. Leuven, what is that? Leuven? I don't even know how to pronounce that. Let's see. Piotr says, I would like some kind of Control-Alt-Delete with some ability to rescue a totally hang-up situation, or is one. Just continually hit Control-G to back out of the current execution in Emacs Lisp. Real namespaces, first class ones, not fake quasi namespaces, Osloy says. Yeah, we definitely talked about that. Carlos says, Doom Emacs user here, watching you for the first time. Keep up the awesome job. Cheers. Thank you very much. Glad to see you. Ashra says, async Emacs Lisp within the editor sounds like a nightmare, though, due to possible data races and race conditions. You don't want to be told, boss, you cannot modify fill column asyncs running. That's a good point. So let me just add that here. But how do you deal with the inevitable concurrency issues? Fade says, built-in support for call CC is the only scheme feature I kind of covet. Don't certain common Lisp implementations have support for continuations to some level? Like, I think SBCL does it? But call CC is a bit different. Because continuations don't necessarily imply call CC. It's more like a compilation strategy. Kay says, what's the point? What is that name? Yeah. Point is kind of a weird way to describe the cursor position. That's for sure. What is Emacs even? It's so silly. It's not even a Mac. Mm-hmm. Okay. Electronic Big Macs. Oh, that could be pretty tasty. Fade says, let's see. There are several continuations packages in Common Lisp. Okay, I wonder if those work to the same level of call CC. They're all built on a language parser. Ew. So basically, you have to use like a custom language just to get continuation support. That's not nice. Continuations are, or let's say first-class continuations in a language are very powerful, but at the same time, it's kind of like brain melting. It's like looking into a portal and seeing yourself looking into the portal in a way. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around what's happening. So it would be nice to have asynchrony that is a more minimal version of what continuations can do. There are some, I think, different implementation strategies that one can follow for that so that it's not so confusing or maybe not so foot gunny, but JVDY Dev says, not to be that person, but immutable data types or some immutable system that can be used to share data with async without having to worry about it. Yeah, that's a super useful part of Clojure and or any other pure functional language. I mean, you could say that well, lists in Lisp are not really immutable. They can be treated as immutable, but I think concells can be manipulated. So that sort of destroys the ability to say that they are persistent data structures. You have to treat them very carefully. Excuse me. Piotr says, would single-threaded UI with freedom to span other threads work? It still wouldn't solve the problem of concurrency issues, I think. So, oh wow, what did I do to my, there we go. So that's about all I had, I think, for this discussion. So just sort of going back to what I was saying before about what my plan is for my own projects, I want to try to come up with a way to make an Emacs-inspired application that is quite hackable, but also maybe is more modern in the sense that the language that you use for extensibility is a bit more modern, and the application model is built around the fact that it's modern and not something that's been dragged into the present day from 1980s computing. But it's difficult because, like even what Ashraz is mentioning here, sure, there are solutions, but you might need copy or pin the world at that point for the async call. After all, you want the editor to be malleable. Complete immutability would block that. Yeah,